In the 6th episode of Rick and Morty, the lead character ruins the entire planet by accident, and his solution is to find a universe where he and his grandson have just died, bury their own corpses in the backyard, and take the dead version's places at the breakfast table. The family never notices. The show never undoes it. Every episode after that follows a boy who is technically a refugee, living in a dead boy's bedroom, eating cereal with parents who are not quite his. That happened in 2013, in the show's first season, and most people who watched it laughed and moved on. Rick and Morty has been recast in the middle of its own run, lost its co-creator overnight, accidentally caused a fast food riot, hidden a suicide attempt inside a wordless montage, and built an entire universe on the quiet idea that none of its characters are real, or special, or worth saving. The usual reason people give for why the show matters is that it is clever, that it does science and philosophy and big ideas. That is the surface. Tonight we are going underneath it, slowly, all the way down, through everything the show buried under the jokes and hoped you were laughing too hard to notice. If this is the kind of thing you like falling asleep to, the slow walk down through something you already know, tap subscribe before we start. It is free, it takes a second, and it brings more of these long quiet nights to you when you need something to drift off to. That is all. We have a long way to go, and the infinite universes are not going anywhere. Neither is the one we are in. So, 7 seasons, 71 episodes, and underneath all of it, underneath the catchphrases and the McNugget sauce and the Mr. Meeseeks and the plumbus and the interdimensional cable, there is a set of things that have been sitting there since that first late night airing, patient and quiet, waiting for someone with a free evening to look. We will look at them one layer at a time. There is no rush. The first thing sits right at the top of the iceberg, the part that is technically above the waterline, the part almost everyone already knows but very few people stop to think about. The whole show began as a joke at the expense of a movie that came out in 1985. Before there was a Rick, and before there was a Morty, there was a short film made by a man named Justin Roiland, and the short film was not kind. It was a crude, deliberately offensive parody of the two lead characters from Back to the Future, an old inventor and a young boy. In the original, the inventor was named after Doc Brown, and the boy was a stand-in for Marty, and the content was so vulgar that it functioned mostly as a dare. The kind of thing a young animator makes to see what he can get away with, taking a wholesome, beloved piece of American childhood and dragging it somewhere uncomfortable. That short was made around 2006. The premise was simple and ugly. The inventor, instead of teaching the boy anything useful, gives him a piece of advice, so crude it cannot be repeated here, and repeats it with escalating intensity. It was animation as provocation, and it circulated in the small world of online animation, where Roiland was building a name for himself. When Adult Swim approached Roiland years later about making a show, he brought the idea to Dan Harmon. Harmon was best known then for creating the sitcom Community, a show about a study group at a community college that had a small, devoted audience and a reputation for being smarter than its ratings. The two of them took the bones of that vulgar little parody and built something else on top. The inventor became Rick Sanchez, the boy became Morty Smith. The relationship stopped being a one-note joke about Back to the Future and became a grandfather and grandson, and the family filled in around them until the parody had a house, a town, a planet, and eventually a multiverse. The thing worth sitting with is how much of the finished show still carries the DNA of that original cruelty. Rick and Morty kept the structure of an older genius dragging a frightened child through experiences the child is not equipped to handle. It held on to the idea of a mentor whose lessons are mostly damage. The parody was crude, but it caught something real about the Back to the Future relationship that the films themselves never examined. A teenager spending all his time with a much older man, pulled into danger, treated as a sidekick to someone else's genius. The short asked, in its ugly way, what that relationship would actually do to the boy, and the show that grew out of it spent 7 seasons answering. Roiland voiced both characters for most of the show's run, performing them loosely, often improvised, recording takes until something stuck. Rick's stammering, burping delivery, and Morty's anxious stutter both came from the same throat. The voice of the man and the voice of the boy he torments came from one person talking to himself in a recording booth. That detail sits underneath the whole show once you know it. The grandfather and the grandson were for years literally the same voice having an argument with itself. The names tell you how little anyone expected. Roland has said the names Rick and Morty were chosen quickly, almost carelessly, because they sounded like the kind of names that go together, the way a vaudeville duo needs 2 syllables in one. The title was not engineered for a franchise. It was a placeholder that stuck, the same way the show itself was a placeholder for a network that needed something to fill a slot, and got something that outgrew the slot entirely. That is the top of the iceberg, a vulgar parody of an old movie, made by a young animator, handed to a sitcom writer, rebuilt into a show about family. Everyone who watches eventually learns this. It sits on the surface, but just below the waterline is a question the show has been circling since the pilot, and it sounds almost like a complaint. How many of these people are even real? The portal gun makes the entire show possible, and it also quietly destroys the foundation of everything the show is about. It is a handheld object, roughly the size of a large remote, that opens a green swirling doorway from wherever you stand to anywhere else. Not just anywhere in this universe, anywhere in any universe. And there is, by the show's own logic, a functionally infinite number of universes. This gets established early and casually, which is part of what makes it land so hard once you actually think about it. In the 6th episode, Rick Potion number 9, Rick makes a mistake. He builds a love serum to help Morty win a girl at school. The serum spreads through the population, mutates, and turns the entire population of Earth into monsters. The world is ruined past any possibility of repair, not merely damaged or threatened, but finished. The Earth Morty grew up on is gone, full of writhing creatures that used to be his classmates and neighbors. Rick's solution is the thing the show never fully recovers from, even when it pretends to. He finds, among the infinite universes, one where a version of himself and a version of Morty have just died in an accident, where the Earth is otherwise identical, where the graves are freshly dug. He takes Morty there. They bury their own corpses in the backyard. They walk into the house and take the place of the dead versions of themselves, and the family does not notice, because the family is also identical, and the show carries on from that point as though nothing has happened. The Morty we follow for the rest of the series is not the Morty from the pilot. He is a refugee from a destroyed world, sleeping in a dead boy's bedroom, eating breakfast with a mother and father who are not technically his, having buried his own body in the yard. The show, having shown you this, mostly declines to dwell on it. Life goes on. The jokes continue. The foundation has been quietly removed and nobody mentions the hole, what the portal gun introduces, and what the show spends years circling without ever fully landing on, is the problem of what any of it is worth if all of it is infinite. If there are endless Mortys, then this Morty is not special. If there are endless Earths, then this Earth is disposable, and the show proves it by disposing of one in the 6th episode and replacing it without ceremony. The infinite universes arrived as a source of adventure, an excuse to go anywhere and meet anything. The cost of infinity is that nothing inside it can matter very much, because there is always another one. The show knows this. It has Rick say it directly, in various forms, across the seasons. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. The line gets quoted as comedy, as Rick's particular brand of cosmic dismissal, and it is also the operating principle of the entire universe the show has built. In a multiverse, the individual is replaceable by definition. There is always another you, slightly different, somewhere through a green door. And if there is always another you, then the you that exists right now is not the point. This is the engine underneath the comedy. Rick can be cruel and careless and indifferent because he has absorbed the truth of the multiverse more completely than anyone. He has seen enough versions of everything that no single version moves him. He has watched enough Mortys, met enough Beths, burned through enough Earths, that the specific people in front of him have become instances of a type rather than people. The portal gun did that to him. It showed him infinity, and infinity is corrosive to the part of a person that cares. The episode that pushes this furthest, and that the fan community returns to most often, is one where Rick and Morty's universe becomes so damaged, so full of their own mistakes, that they simply abandon it. They portal into a new one where they have, again, recently died, and they take the dead version's places. By this point in the show it has happened more than once, and the casualness of it is the horror. The family they live with is not the family they were born to. The bedroom Morty sleeps in belonged to a Morty who is now dead, and it is fine. The show presents it as fine. It treats universe hopping the way other shows treat moving to a new apartment. Underneath all of it sits the quietest version of the question, the one the show is genuinely afraid to answer. Morty has died and been replaced this many times, and the family cannot tell the difference, so the thing we have been watching becomes hard to name. The show is not obviously about specific people at all. It might be about a role being filled by whoever happens to be standing in the right universe when the camera turns on. That is a lot to carry for a cartoon. The show carries it lightly most of the time, but it is down there, under the portal gun, under the green light, and it surfaces just often enough to remind you that it never left. There is a smaller, stranger thing at roughly the same depth, and it is worth a moment. The garage. Almost everything Rick does, he does in the garage. The most advanced technology in the known multiverse, devices that rewrite reality and open doors between worlds and bring back the dead, gets built on a workbench next to a water heater, in a suburban garage, in a house in a town the show never quite locates. The most powerful being it has ever depicted chooses to live in his daughter's garage, surrounded by the ordinary clutter of a family that does not understand him and that he could leave behind at any moment by stepping through one of his own doors. He does not leave. That is the part that matters and the part the show keeps returning to. A man who can go anywhere, who has been everywhere, who has watched versions of his own life play out in every possible arrangement, chooses to stay in a garage in the suburbs with people who annoy him. The garage holds the show's biggest unanswered question, the one underneath all the others, which is why Rick stays. He could be anywhere. He chose here. And the show spends 7 seasons refusing to give a clean answer, because a clean answer would mean Rick cares. And Rick caring is the thing the show guards most carefully, revealing it only in moments so brief you could blink and miss them. That brings us a little further down, past the gun in the garage, to the family, and to a character the show treats as comic relief while quietly building one of its saddest arcs around him. Jerry Smith, Morty's father, Beth's husband, the man Rick despises more openly than almost anyone in any universe. Jerry is on the surface a simple joke, the insecure, ineffectual father. Not smart enough to keep up with Rick, not confident enough to stand up to him. The husband his wife seems to have settled for, the dad his children mostly tolerate. He works in advertising in a vague, unimpressive way. He is afraid of most things. He fishes for compliments. He fails at the small tasks of being a man in his own house, and Rick narrates those failures with open contempt. The show, almost despite itself, keeps finding the thing underneath Jerry, and the thing underneath Jerry is one of the more honest portraits of a certain kind of ordinary life it ever produced. Jerry is the only main character who is neither a genius nor a child. He is an average adult, of average ability, in a household that contains the smartest being in the universe. The show uses him to ask a question it never says out loud. What is it like to be ordinary in a world that worships intelligence? What is it like to be the one person in the room who cannot follow the conversation, who cannot fix the machine, who cannot save the day, who is, by the standards the show itself sets, simply not enough? Jerry's defining trait is that he wants to be loved and is not sure he deserves it, and the show is unusually patient with that. There is an episode where his survival depends entirely on his belief in himself, and the cruelty of it is that Jerry's lack of confidence is exactly the thing the show has spent every other episode mocking. The trait that makes him a joke becomes, for one episode, a matter of life and death. And you feel, for a moment, how exhausting it must be to be Jerry, to know you are the least capable person in your own family, to suspect your father-in-law might be right about you, to love your wife and not be sure she loves you back, and to live every day in the gravity of a man who could erase you, and occasionally seems to think about it. What makes Jerry tragic rather than pathetic is that he is in his limited way trying. He is not cruel. He is not ambitious in any way that hurts anyone. He wants a stable family and a wife who loves him and children who respect him, and he is failing at all three, because he is ordinary in a story that has no use for ordinary people, not because he is bad. The show is built to celebrate Rick, the man who can do anything, and Jerry is the necessary counterweight, the man who can do almost nothing, and the show needs him to be a joke because if it let him be fully a person, the contrast would become unbearable. Rick gets to be a god. Jerry has to be the price of admitting that most of us are not. There is a detail the fan community holds onto. In one of the multiverse episodes, where Rick and Morty visit a reality built around a particular gimmick, there is a brief glimpse of a version of Jerry who is successful, confident, accomplished. A Jerry who made different choices, or had different luck, and became the man this Jerry wishes he were. That successful Jerry, out there through a green door, is its own quiet cruelty, because it means this Jerry's failure was not inevitable. It is that this particular Jerry, the one we follow, drew the version of the life where he is not enough. The two of them will never meet, and if they did, the successful one would probably look at our Jerry the way Rick does. The marriage between Jerry and Beth is the show's longest-running source of genuine, unfunny pain. They separate, they reconcile, they go to a kind of alien marriage counseling that turns their resentments into physical monsters, and the creatures they produce reveal that they do not see each other clearly at all, that the marriage rests on two distorted images with very little to do with the actual people involved. They are married to ideas of each other, and the ideas are not kind. The show does eventually give Jerry small mercies. He survives. In the later seasons, he is treated with a little more tenderness, allowed the occasional real win, permitted to be loved in small ways, but the core of the character never changes. Jerry is the man who is not special, in a show about the most special being alive, and the gap between those two facts is where the show keeps its most honest sadness. Everyone watching knows a Jerry. Most people watching are at least a little bit Jerry. The show, for all its cruelty toward him, seems to understand that, which is why it never quite lets him be destroyed. We are going deeper now, past the family, to a character who appears for only a few minutes across the entire run but carries more weight than almost anyone, because of what his appearances imply about everything else. Bird Person. Bird Person is exactly what the name describes. A person who is also a bird, an alien who fought alongside Rick in a war long before the show began. He is calm where Rick is frantic, formal where Rick is crude, sincere where Rick deflects everything with a joke. He speaks slowly and means what he says, and he is, as far as the show ever lets anyone be, Rick's friend, maybe the only real one Rick has ever had. Bird Person matters out of all proportion to his screen time because he is a window into Rick's past, and Rick's past is the thing the show protects most carefully. Through Bird Person, we learn that Rick was once part of something larger than himself. There was a rebellion, a war against a galactic government, a cause Rick believed in enough to fight for. The man we know, the man who insists nothing matters and nobody belongs anywhere, was once a man who believed in a thing enough to risk dying for it. Bird Person is the living evidence that the Rick we are watching is a ruin, that he used to be someone else. Something happened between the soldier who fought in that war and the grandfather who drinks in the garage, and whatever it was, it broke the part of Rick that could believe. At Bird Person's wedding, in one of the most quietly devastating turns in the early seasons, the marriage collapses into a massacre. Bird Person is marrying a woman who turns out to be an enemy agent, and the celebration becomes a battle, and Bird Person is, by the end of it, dead, or close enough that the difference does not matter for years. The one person who knew the old Rick, the one who could have told us who Rick used to be, is shot at his own wedding, and the show moves on, because the show always moves on, and Rick moves on hardest of all. There is a line Bird Person delivers about Rick that the fan community has turned over more than almost any other piece of dialogue. He explains a phrase Rick uses, a casual-sounding catchphrase Rick throws around as a joke, and reveals that in Bird Person's language the phrase does not mean what everyone assumes. It means something closer to despair. Something closer to a man who has decided that pain is the price of being alive and would rather not pay it. The catchphrase fans put on t-shirts and shout at conventions is, when translated by the one person who actually understands Rick, a quiet confession that Rick does not want to be here. It was hiding in plain sight the whole time, a death wish disguised as a punchline, and only Bird Person could read it. That is the function Bird Person serves. He is the translator. He is the one being who can look at Rick and see, underneath the genius and the cruelty and the bottomless contempt, a man in a tremendous amount of pain who has built an entire personality around not having to feel it. Every other character takes Rick at face value. They respond to his power, his danger, his unpredictability. Bird Person sees the wound, and the show kills him, or seems to, because the show cannot let Rick keep a person who sees him clearly. That would require Rick to be seen, and being seen is the one thing Rick spends every waking moment avoiding. When Bird Person returns in the later seasons, rebuilt in a damaged form, the reunion is not triumphant. It is painful, because the Bird Person who comes back is angry, and he has reason to be, and Rick has to face the one person who knew him before he became this. Their conversations in the later seasons are some of the only times Rick is forced to stop performing. There is no audience for him to play to when Bird Person is in the room. There is only the truth, and the truth is that Rick has spent decades running from the kind of connection bird person represents, because connection means the possibility of loss, and Rick has lost enough that he decided, somewhere back in that war, to stop letting anything in. Underneath bird person is the war, and underneath the war is the question of what Rick was fighting for, and underneath that is the deepest version of the Rick mystery. His wife and daughter, the original Beth, the original family, the thing that happened before the garage. The show holds this back for a long time, and when it finally reaches for it, it does so carefully, because this is the center of the iceberg as far as Rick is concerned. There is a memory, or a fabricated memory, or a memory the show is not sure it wants you to trust, in which Rick had a wife named Diane, and a young daughter named Beth, and they were killed. A bomb, delivered through a portal, by a version of Rick from another universe, or by the government, or by some combination the show deliberately keeps smudged. Diane and the young Beth, erased in an instant, in the home Rick had built before he became the man in the garage. The story the show tells, in its most revealing moments, is that this loss is the thing that made Rick. Before Diane died, Rick was a scientist with a family and a life and a reason to invent the portal gun, which was to find them again, or to find a universe where they had not died, or to take revenge on whoever killed them. The portal gun, the device that powers the entire show, the device that proves nothing matters because everything is infinite, was built by a grieving man trying to undo a death, and what he found, when he opened the doors, was infinity. He went looking for his dead wife and daughter, and what he found was a billion versions of them, none of them his, all of them slightly wrong, and the search broke him. That is the thing at the center of Rick. He has access to infinite universes, which means he has access to infinite versions of Diane, and he cannot have any of them because none of them are the one he lost. He could portal to a universe where Diane is alive right now. He has almost certainly done it. It does not help, because the Diane in that universe is not his Diane. She is a stranger with his dead wife's face, and her existence is worse than her absence, because it proves that what he lost was specific, that infinity cannot replace a single particular person, that the one thing the multiverse cannot give him is the only thing he ever wanted. This is why Rick believes nothing matters. He has tested the proposition more thoroughly than any being in the show. He went looking for the meaning of a single life across infinite universes, and he found that the universe does not care, that there is always another version, that the specific drowns in the infinite. He was right, and being right destroyed him. The nihilism is not a pose. It is a conclusion he reached the hard way, by experiment, by opening every door he could find looking for one face, and never finding it. The Beth we follow, Rick's adult daughter, the surgeon, lives inside this loss without fully understanding it. She knows her father left when she was young. She knows he came back decades later with no explanation. She does not know, or does not let herself know, that her father has watched 1,000 versions of her grow up and die. That when he looks at her, he is also looking at the daughter he lost, the young Beth who died with Diane, and that this Beth, the one who survived, is a kind of consolation prize in a game Rick never wanted to play. The relationship between Rick and Beth is the second deepest thing in the show, after Rick's grief itself, because Beth is the one person Rick cannot be fully nihilistic about. He can dismiss the universe. He can dismiss Jerry, and Morty, and Summer, and the infinite Earths he burns through. But Beth is the daughter of the wife he lost, the survivor of the family that was taken from him, and his cruelty stops, mostly, at her edge. He spoils her, he indulges her, he builds her a way to leave, offers her escapes from the ordinary life she resents, because Beth is the closest thing Rick has to a reason, and a man with one reason guards it more fiercely than a man with none. There is an episode that detonates this entire structure, and the fan community has never stopped arguing about it. Rick offers Beth a choice. She can stay, in her ordinary life, with her ordinary husband and her ordinary children, or she can leave, go out into the universe, have the adventures she always felt she was denied. And to make the choice clean, Rick offers to make a clone of her, a perfect copy, so that whichever Beth leaves, a Beth remains behind to keep the family intact, and neither will know which one is the original. Beth makes her choice. And the show, tellingly, never tells us which Beth we are watching afterward. The Beth in the kitchen might be the original who stayed, or the clone left behind to hold the family together while the real Beth roams the stars, and the show withholds the answer on purpose, and even Rick may not know, and Beth may not know either. The withholding is the point. because it aims the same question the portal gun raised back in the 6th episode at the most emotionally important character besides Rick. A clone and an original, nobody able to tell the difference. The clone carrying all the same memories, and loving the same family, and living the same life, and the difference between them shrinks to nothing you can measure. The show makes you sit in that, and it does not let you out. Rick spends a later episode genuinely tormented by it, running tests, trying to determine whether the Beth he has been living with is his real daughter or the clone he made. And the torment is real because it matters to him. It is the one thing that matters to him, and he cannot find out. The man who decided nothing matters found the one thing that does, and the multiverse took even that certainty from him. He does not know if his own daughter is his daughter. He built a machine that makes copies indistinguishable from originals, used it on the one person he could not afford to lose, and now he has lost the ability to know if he lost her. That is the core of it. A man who lost a specific family, built a device to undo the loss, discovered that the universe is infinite and therefore that no specific thing can be recovered, and slowly, across decades, became a person who believes nothing matters because believing nothing matters is the only way to survive, having proven it. The show keeps him alive, keeps him drinking in the garage, keeps him saving a grandson he insists he does not care about, because the alternative, the thing Bird Person read in his catchphrase, is the thing Rick is most afraid of and most drawn to at the same time. We will come back to that, to whether Rick wants to be alive, because it is the deepest thing in the show and it deserves its own descent. First, there is a layer that sits between the family and the abyss, one that is on its surface, among the funniest things the show ever made. And underneath that surface, one of the saddest, the Mr. Meeseeks. A Mr. Meeseeks is a creature you summon by pressing a button on a box. It appears, blue and grinning and eager, and it exists for one purpose, to fulfill a single request, and once that request is fulfilled, it vanishes, it stops existing. That is the whole design. A Meeseeks is born to complete one task and then to stop being. And the show establishes, with a lightness that hides how dark it is, that existence is painful for a Meeseeks. Being alive hurts them. They do not want to linger. Completing the task is not just their purpose, it is their release. They want to die, gently, the moment their job is done, because being is suffering, and the only mercy is how brief it is. The episode that introduces them turns this into a nightmare of escalation. Jerry asks a Meeseeks to help him improve his golf game, a task far harder to complete than building a rocket or fixing a marriage, because golf is a skill and skills resist quick fixes. As Jerry fails to improve, the Meeseeks lingers, and lingering is agony, so it summons another Meeseeks to help, and that one lingers too, and summons another, and the population of suffering blue creatures multiplies, each in increasing torment, each desperate to finish the task that will let them stop existing, until the whole group falls into violence and despair, willing to do anything, including murder, to end the unbearable condition of being alive 1 minute longer than necessary. The joke is the escalation. The thing underneath the joke is the proposition that existence is a burden and the kindest thing a life can be is short and purposeful. A Meeseeks is content only in the instant before it disappears, having done the one thing it was made to do. The show, having built a whole comic set piece out of this, lets it sit, because it is not really a joke about golf. It is a small, complete philosophy of life, delivered by grinning blue creatures who beg for death. They are the cheerful, screaming opposite of Rick. Rick has lived too long and seen too much and cannot find a reason to stop. The Meeseeks have lived for minutes and want nothing more than to be allowed to end. Both have concluded that being alive is mostly pain. They arrived at the conclusion from opposite directions. There is a detail in the design that gets worse the longer you hold it. A Meeseeks can summon other Meeseeks, but the summoned ones are also Meeseeks. So a Meeseeks in agony creates more agony, brings more suffering creatures into being, each of whom creates more if they cannot finish quickly enough. The only way to stop the chain is to complete the original task, to give the first Meeseeks its release, which then releases all the others. The whole horrible cascade resolves the instant one small purpose is fulfilled. The desire to die makes more life that also wants to die, and the only off switch is success. That is the kind of thing the show buries inside its comedy. You laugh at the blue men screaming in a garage, and then later, in the dark, you realize you watched a 30-minute argument that being alive is a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be enjoyed, and that the show seemed to mostly agree with the screaming blue men. Underneath the Meeseeks, a little deeper, is a layer about the show's relationship with its own audience, and it is one of the stranger things a popular show has ever done. The McNugget sauce. In 2017, the show aired an episode in which Rick reveals that his entire motivation, the secret driving force behind everything he does, is a desire to taste a particular dipping sauce that a fast food restaurant had released years earlier as a promotional tie-in for a movie and then discontinued. The sauce was real. It had been a genuine limited-time product, released to promote an animated film in 1998, and gone for nearly 2 decades. Rick declares that getting that sauce back is his one true purpose, that he would do anything, sacrifice anyone, cross any universe, to taste it again. It was a joke, a deliberately absurd joke about how the things that drive people are often petty and meaningless, about how a man capable of anything might be moved by something as small and stupid as a nostalgic craving for a condiment. Within the show, it commented on Rick's nihilism, the idea that when nothing matters, the only things left to want are arbitrary, that a god might as well chase a sauce because chasing a sauce is no less meaningful than chasing anything else in a meaningless universe. Then the real world did something the show did not intend and could not control. Fans took the joke as a demand. They began contacting the fast food restaurant in large numbers, insisting the sauce be brought back, treating a throwaway gag about the emptiness of desire as a literal call to action. The restaurant, sensing a marketing opportunity, agreed and announced a limited release, and the release was badly mishandled, with far too little sauce produced for the crowds who showed up. There was anger, real anger, over a dipping sauce, and some of it turned ugly, with reports of people behaving badly toward staff who had nothing to do with the shortage. The thing to sit with is that the show made a joke about how the things people want are meaningless, and the audience responded by demonstrating, in the realest possible way, that the joke was true. The show said, "Look how empty desire is. Look how a man capable of anything could be reduced to chasing a sauce." And a portion of the audience heard this and went out and chased the sauce, with the exact fervor the show had been mocking, proving the point so completely that the point stopped being funny. The satire became the thing it was satirizing. The audience became the joke. The creators have spoken about this with a kind of bafflement. They wrote a story about the emptiness of the things we pursue, and the pursuit they invented as a symbol of emptiness became a real pursuit, pursued really, by real people, who seem to have missed that the whole thing was a warning. It is one of the clearest examples in modern television of a show losing control of its own meaning, of an audience taking the surface and discarding the substance, and it sits in the iceberg as a strange artifact of what happens when a show about meaninglessness gets popular enough that its jokes start altering reality. There is a darker reading the fan community has built over the years, and it goes past the marketing chaos. In the episode, the sauce is framed as Rick's true motivation, but the framing is suspect because Rick is an unreliable narrator of his own desires, and because the episode is structured as something Rick is telling, or imagining, in a moment of vulnerability. The reading goes like this: Rick does not actually care about the sauce. The sauce is a deflection. It is the safest possible thing for Rick to claim as his motivation, because it is so absurd, so meaningless, that admitting to it costs him nothing. If Rick said his motivation was Diane, or Beth, or the wish to undo the loss that built him, he would be exposed, he would be seen, he would have admitted that something matters to him. The sauce is a shield. It lets him perform having a motivation while hiding the real one. He would rather the universe believe he is driven by a condiment than risk anyone discovering he is driven by grief. That is the show at its most characteristic. A joke about a fast food sauce that turns out, if you look at it long enough, to be a man hiding his deepest wound behind the most disposable thing he can find, because being seen to want something real is more dangerous to Rick than any monster in any universe. We are going to keep going down, past the sauce, to a layer that is genuinely strange even by the show's standards, a layer about the making of the show itself, and the things that happened behind the camera. The first of those is the question of the man who was the show. For most of the show's run, Justin Roiland was Rick and Morty. He co-created it. He voiced both title characters. His sensibility, the improvisational, anything goes, often grotesque energy of the early seasons, was the texture of the thing. When people imitated the show, they imitated his voices, the burp and the stammer, the two throats one-man performance that made the central relationship feel like a single mind arguing with itself. For 9 years, the show and the man were hard to separate. In January 2023, that ended. Roiland was facing legal proceedings in California, and the studio behind the show made a decision and made it fast. They cut ties with him entirely. He was removed from the show he had co-created. He would no longer voice Rick or Morty. He would no longer be involved in any capacity. The separation was total, announced without the usual softening, without the language of mutual decisions or amicable partings. The studio said it had ended its association with him, and that was the statement, delivered flat. The legal matter was later resolved in a way that did not result in the outcome the charges had threatened, and the specifics of what was alleged and what was concluded belong in a courtroom and a news report rather than a video about a cartoon. What matters for the Iceberg is the effect on the show, because the effect was unprecedented. A series lost the voice of its two lead characters, the voice of its co-creator, the voice that had defined it for 9 years. In the middle of its run, with seasons already ordered and a production pipeline already moving, and the show had to decide whether it could continue without the man who had been, in the most literal sense, half of its dialogue. It decided that it could. The studio announced the show would go on, that Rick and Morty would be recast, that new performers would be found to voice the characters Roiland had originated. This raised a question the fan community fell into immediately, and has not fully climbed out of. A question the show had spent years preparing them to ask, without anyone realizing it was preparation. Replace the voice of Rick, and you have to ask whether it is still Rick. The show had been asking this about its own characters since the 6th episode. It had buried its Mortys in the backyard, and replaced them with identical Mortys. It had cloned Beth and refused to say which one survived. It had built an entire universe on the idea that any individual is replaceable by a sufficiently similar copy, that the original and the duplicate are indistinguishable, that there is no detectable difference between a thing and its perfect imitation. Then, in 2023, the show was forced to live the idea. It had to replace its irreplaceable voices with copies good enough that the audience would accept them, and it had to hope the audience would do for the show what the family in the show always did for the replaced Mortys, which is fail to notice, or notice and not care, or notice and decide it changed nothing that mattered. The recasting was handled with a nervous secrecy. The studio held auditions, looking for performers who could match Roland's vocal performances so closely that the audience would barely register the change. They did not announce who the new performers were. The new season aired with Rick and Morty sounding almost exactly as they always had, and the credits did not at first reveal the names of the people now doing the voices. The studio wanted the audience to hear the characters and not the change, to accept the copies without dwelling on the fact that they were copies. They were betting that the show's own thesis was correct, that a good enough replacement is functionally the original, that nobody in the end can really tell the difference, and that the ones who can will get used to it. It mostly worked. The performers who took over, eventually identified, did the voices well enough that the show continued without collapsing. Some fans heard the difference and minded. Most heard it and adjusted. The show became, by accident, the most complete demonstration of its own central idea it had ever produced. For 7 seasons it had told you that individuals are replaceable, that the multiverse makes everyone interchangeable, that a copy with the same memories and the same voice and the same role is for all practical purposes the same. Then it proved it, on itself, in public, by replacing its own voices, and continuing as though the men who spoke those words were as disposable as the Mortys they had voiced. The show wrote its own contingency into its premise years before it needed it, and when the moment came, the premise held. There is something genuinely strange about a show predicting the conditions of its own crisis. Rick and Morty spent years exploring what it means to replace a person with an indistinguishable copy, and then it had to do exactly that to survive, and the survival proved the years of exploration right. The audience accepted the recast Rick the way Beth's family accepted whichever Beth came home. They could not always tell, and even when they could, the alternative, the insistence that only the original counts, would have meant the end of something they wanted to keep. They chose the copy over the absence. The show had told them they would. They did. Underneath the recasting, a little deeper, is the question of how the show was actually written, because the writing tells you why the show is the way it is. Rick and Morty was, especially in the early seasons, built on improvisation. Roland recorded his lines loosely, departing from the script, inventing in the booth, and the strange, halting, half-finished quality of a lot of Rick's dialogue, the trailing sentences, and the sudden burps and the way Rick interrupts himself, came from a man genuinely making it up as he went. The character sounded like he was thinking in real time because the performer was thinking in real time. The improvisation was the realism. The structure underneath the improvisation came from somewhere else, from Dan Harmon, and Harmon had a theory of stories he applied to almost everything he made. He called it the story circle, a simplified version of older ideas about how myths and narratives work. A wheel a character travels around. A character is in a comfortable, ordinary situation. They want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation to get it. They adapt. They get what they wanted. They pay a price for it. And they return to where they started, changed. Harmon applied this circle obsessively to episodes, to seasons, to character arcs, and the discipline of it is part of why the show, for all its chaos, rarely feels shapeless. The lunacy on the surface sits on top of a very old and very rigid skeleton. The tension between those two forces, Rowland's improvisation and Harmon's structure, is the engine of the show's best work. The improvisation provides the texture, the unpredictability, the sense that anything can happen. The structure provides the shape, the sense that the anything that happens is going somewhere. When the show works, it is because the two are balanced. When it falters, it is usually because one has overwhelmed the other. Because an episode is all improvised chaos with no underlying shape, or all rigid structure with no life. The show is at its best in the narrow band where a man making it up in a booth is contained inside a wheel. An obsessive structuralist drew years before the line was spoken. There is a detail about Harmon's relationship to the show that connects back to Rick. Harmon has spoken openly about his own struggles, about depression, about drinking, about a darkness in himself that he poured into the character. Rick's nihilism is not invented out of nothing. It is a version of something one of the writers actually felt, dramatized, and exaggerated, and handed a portal gun, but rooted in a real person's real experience of believing, at the bottom of bad nights, that nothing matters. When Rick says nothing matters, he is saying something one of his creators has felt and survived, which is part of why the line lands harder than a joke should. A writer gave a character the worst thing he himself had thought, and then spent 7 seasons trying to work out, through the character, whether there is any way to keep living once you have thought it. That is the layer underneath the production. The show is funny because of the improvisation, shaped because of the structure, and sad because the sadness is real. Because the man who built Rick built him out of his own worst nights. And Rick's question, whether a person who believes nothing matters can find a reason to stay alive, is a question the writer was asking himself, in public through a cartoon, for years. There is a piece of the show's design that it drops early and then complicates for years, and it concerns our Rick specifically, the one we follow. Among the infinite Ricks the show suggests, ours is special. He is by reputation among the other Ricks, the original, or close to it, the one the Citadel itself was in some sense built around, the Rick the other Ricks fear and resent and cannot govern. Our Rick refused to join the council. Our Rick holds the Citadel in contempt. Our Rick is, in the show's own language, the Rickest Rick, the most fully realized version of what a Rick is, the smartest, the most capable, and also the most damaged, the most alone, the one who took the logic of being Rick further than any other Rick dared. The Morty he travels with is special too, though for a long time the show lets you wonder how. A Morty traveling with the Rickest Rick is the most exposed Morty in the multiverse, because Mortys exist, in the Citadel's cold accounting, partly as camouflage. A Rick's brainwaves are detectable, dangerous, easy to track, and a Morty's brainwaves cancel them out, hide them, provide cover. The infinite Ricks keep infinite Mortys close not only out of family feeling but because a Morty is a shield, a way for a Rick to move through the universe undetected. The grandson is, at the level the Citadel operates on, a device. A Rick brings a Morty the way a soldier brings camouflage. The show lets that sit underneath the whole grandfather-grandson relationship, the possibility that Morty's deepest function, in the cold infinite system, is to make Rick harder to find. What keeps this from being the whole truth is that our Rick and our Morty exceeded the function, whatever they were supposed to be to each other in the Citadel's accounting, a genius and his cover. They became something the accounting did not predict, which is attached. Our Rick could swap this Morty for any of infinite others, all of whom would provide the same camouflage. He does not. He keeps this one. That refusal, the choice of this specific disposable Morty over the infinite interchangeable supply, is the same choice Rick makes about everything. The choice to treat one instance as if it were not an instance, to act, against all the evidence of infinity, as though this one is the one. The Citadel built a system where Mortys are equipment, Our Rick, the one who understands the system better than anyone, broke its rule in the smallest and most stubborn way available, by caring which Morty he carries. We are getting deep now. The light from the surface is mostly gone. The next layer is one of the things the show does best and explains least, and it is the thing the fan community calls, for lack of a better term, the lore. The sense that underneath the standalone episodes there is a connected story, a continuity, a set of ongoing threads that the show plants and abandons and occasionally returns to, and that this continuity is both real and deliberately frustrated. For its first season, the show was almost entirely episodic. Each episode was a contained adventure, a trip through a portal to a strange place, a problem and a resolution, with the family back home by the end. The continuity was light. You could watch the episodes in almost any order. The show seemed, on the surface, to be a procedural, a monster of the week structure in science fiction clothes, built for syndication and casual viewing. Underneath the episodic surface, threads were being planted. The buried Mortys from the 6th episode, the hints about Rick's past, a recurring antagonist or two, a government interested in Rick, other Ricks, from other universes, organized into a council. As the seasons went on, these threads thickened, and the show began to suggest there was a larger story, a connected mythology, a set of ongoing stakes the standalone episodes were quietly building toward, and then, repeatedly, the show would refuse to deliver on it. It would plant a thread and abandon it. It would build toward a confrontation, and then sidestep it with a joke. It would establish a major piece of mythology, and then have a character dismiss it, often Rick himself, often straight to the audience, with a line about how serialized storytelling is a trap, how lore is for nerds, how the show is not going to give you the satisfying connected narrative you want because giving you that would make it like every other show. The show would build the iceberg and then mock you for looking at it. This is one of the most divisive things about Rick and Morty among the people who follow it closely. The show is constantly daring you to take it seriously and then punishing you for doing so. It plants mysteries and then treats your interest in them as a character flaw. It builds a mythology and then has its smartest character explain that mythology is a crutch. The fan community splits between those who find this exhilarating, a show too clever to be trapped by its own continuity, and those who find it exhausting, a show that will not commit to anything, that uses irony as a shield against ever having to deliver, that raises stakes it has no intention of paying off, because paying off would require sincerity, and sincerity is the one thing the show is most afraid of. The deepest version of this tension lives in a single recurring idea, and it is the idea that gives the show its most genuine source of dread: Evil Morty. Among the infinite Ricks and the infinite Mortys, the show establishes there is a council of Ricks, a governing body of Rick Sanchez from across the multiverse who have organized to protect their shared interests. The premise is already strange. An infinite number of the same arrogant genius forming a bureaucracy. A government of identical men who all believe they are the smartest being alive and all have to coexist. Within this structure, a mystery develops, a series of Ricks being murdered, and the investigation leads, eventually, to a Morty. One particular Morty, behind the killings, manipulating the Ricks, running a long game the Ricks, in their arrogance, never see coming, because they cannot conceive of a Morty as a threat. To a Rick, a Morty is a sidekick, a cover, a tool. The idea that a Morty might be the most dangerous being in the multiverse is, to the Ricks, unthinkable. And that unthinkability is exactly what lets this Morty win. Evil Morty is the show's best idea, and its most carefully developed thread, built with a patience the show rarely shows for anything. He appears, vanishes for seasons, returns, and his plan, when it finally becomes clear, is not what the audience expected. He is not trying to take over the multiverse. He is not trying to rule the infinite Ricks. He is trying to escape. He has understood something about the structure of the multiverse that the Ricks refuse to understand, and he wants out of the entire system, out of the central reality where all the infinite Ricks and Mortys are bound, into something beyond it, somewhere the infinite recursion of Ricks and Mortys does not reach. What makes Evil Morty land so hard is what he represents. He is the Morty who refused to be a Morty. Every other Morty accepts the role, accepts being the grandson, the sidekick, the one who gets dragged along and damaged and replaced. Evil Morty looked at the role and rejected it, looked at the infinite system of Ricks using infinite Mortys as accessories to their own genius, and decided to break out rather than play his assigned part. He is the rebellion against the show's own premise, the character who saw the interchangeable, disposable nature of being a Morty, and said no, refused to be one of infinite copies, decided to become singular through the only means available, which was to become the thing no Morty is supposed to be, a threat. His escape when it comes is genuinely unsettling because it suggests the entire show, the whole apparatus of infinite universes and portal guns and adventures, is a kind of prison. The multiverse the show has been celebrating as a source of infinite possibility is, from another angle, a trap, a system built to keep Rick central and Morty's subordinate, and the only sane response to understanding the system is to want out of it. Evil Morty understood the iceberg better than anyone. He looked at the bottom of it and decided the only victory was leaving. The show, characteristically, does not fully follow him out. It lets him escape and then mostly returns to its episodic comfort, to the family in the garage, to the adventures and the jokes, declining to follow the one character who saw the whole structure clearly. Following him would mean confronting the thing he understood, which is that the show's universe is a cage, and the show would rather be a cartoon about a family than a tragedy about a prison. So it lets evil Morty go, and stays behind with the people who never figured out they were trapped. If you are still with me somewhere in the warm middle of all this, and your eyes have gone heavy the way they are supposed to, that is exactly right. Before we go any deeper, if you have been enjoying the descent, a quiet tap on the subscribe button helps more than you would think, and it keeps these long, slow nights coming. No rush, the doors will still be open when you get back. We are going to drop further down now, past the lore, because there are things deeper in the iceberg that are quieter than the threads the show abandons, and they are some of the most interesting things it ever did. The first is the place where all the infinite Ricks and Mortys live together. The Citadel. The Citadel of Ricks is a city, a society, built and inhabited entirely by versions of Rick and versions of Morty from across the infinite universes. The premise, examined closely, is a nightmare, an infinite number of the same arrogant genius, all of whom believe they are the smartest being alive, forced to live together, to govern themselves, to build an economy and a class structure and a political system out of nothing but copies of one man and one boy. And the show, when it finally takes us inside the Citadel for a sustained look, reveals something genuinely bleak. The society of Ricks has recreated, in miniature, every injustice of the world the Ricks supposedly rose above. There are rich Ricks and poor Ricks. There are Ricks who do menial labor and Ricks who rule. There are Mortys treated as an underclass, sent to schools that train them to be better accessories to their Ricks, denied any agency, used as cover and shields and tools. The infinite genius, given the chance to build any society it wanted, with unlimited intelligence and unlimited resources, built the same hierarchy, the same exploitation, the same misery, just with one face. The Ricks are smart enough to do anything, and they used their intelligence to recreate oppression with extra steps. Because intelligence, the show argues again and again, does not produce wisdom or kindness or justice. It produces more efficient versions of whatever the person already was, and what Rick already was, underneath the genius, was a damaged man who would rather rule than connect, and an infinite number of damaged men who would rather rule than connect, builds exactly the kind of city the Citadel turns out to be. The episode that follows an ordinary Citadel Rick and an ordinary Citadel Morty through their daily lives is one of the show's saddest, because it shows you the versions of the characters who never got to be the main characters, the background Ricks and Mortys who live in the margins of the infinite, small, miserable, exploited lives inside a system built by their own infinite selves. A Rick who works a dead-end job, a Morty running for office, full of hope, who turns out to be the most dangerous one of all. The episode treats them as real, as fully human, and in doing so it forces the question the whole show keeps forcing. If there are infinite Ricks living infinite lives, then this Rick, our Rick, the one we follow, is just one more, no more special than the Rick working the dead-end job, no more real than the Mortys in the underclass. The show we are watching is one thread pulled from an infinite miserable weave of them. And the only reason we follow this Rick instead of a sad Citadel Rick is that the camera happened to point here. Evil Morty's escape, when it comes, is an escape from the Citadel and everything it stands for, an escape from the entire infinite system of Ricks and Mortys reproducing their misery across endless universes. It lands so hard because, by the time it comes, the show has shown you enough of the Citadel to make you want to escape too. The infinite is not a wonderland. It is a city full of the same broken man, exploiting the same broken boy, forever, and the only character clever enough to see it for what it is spends his entire arc trying to get out. That is the bottom of the Citadel layer. The infinite multiverse, the show's central source of wonder, is also its central source of horror, and the horror is that infinity does not free you, it multiplies the prison. Beside the Citadel, easy to walk past, is a smaller layer the fan community keeps returning to, because of how much it says in how little time. A game called Roy, in a store. In one of the early episodes, there is an arcade machine called Roy, a life well lived. You put on a headset, and you live an entire human life. Not a game in the usual sense, with levels and points, but a whole life, from childhood to death, lived in full, with all the texture and weight of a real existence. Rick hands it to Morty as something to do while Rick shops, the way you might hand a child a phone. Morty puts on the headset and becomes Roy. He lives Roy's whole life. Childhood, school, a job selling carpet, a marriage, a son, an illness, beaten through years of effort, a return to ordinary life. And then, decades in, an accident, and Roy's death, and Morty pulls off the headset, shaken, having lived and died as someone else, having experienced an entire human lifespan in the few minutes Rick spent browsing. The whole arc of a life, the work and the love and the fear and the long, slow, ordinary middle of it, compressed and then over, and Morty standing in an arcade trying to remember that he is Morty and not Roy, that the life he just lived was not his, that he is 14 and not dead. The thing underneath Roy is one of the quietest horrors the show ever produced. The question of what a life is worth if it can be lived in an arcade in a few minutes. Roy lived a complete life. He worked and married and raised a child, and fought an illness, and grew old and died. And all of it, the entire shape of a human existence, was a game in a store, played by a bored teenager, forgotten almost immediately. The show lets that sit, because Roy's life, lived in minutes, looks from the outside exactly like a real life looks from a great enough distance. Brief, contained, over before you have quite registered it began. The arcade game is the multiverse's joke about all of us, the suggestion that any life, viewed from far enough away, from Rick's vantage where infinite lives play out across infinite universes, is just a Roy, a complete and meaningful and entirely disposable thing, lived in what amounts to an afternoon, and then the headset comes off. Rick, when Morty tries to talk about it, does not engage. He has lived too many Roys, in a sense, seen too many complete lives across too many universes, to be moved by one more. But Morty is moved. Morty lived it. The gap between them, between the boy shaken by a single borrowed life and the man numb to infinite ones, is the gap the whole show keeps measuring. To Morty, a life still matters, even a fake one, even Roy's. To Rick, no life matters, not even his own, and the not mattering is the wound the show keeps circling. Just beneath Roy is a layer about Rick's own relationship to death, and it is stranger and darker than anything yet, because it concerns the way Rick has arranged to never really die at all. The show establishes, across its run, that Rick has prepared for his own death the way a wealthy man prepares his estate, except that what Rick has prepared is continuation. There are clones, there are backup bodies, there are automated protocols that activate when a Rick dies, grow a new body, transfer the mind, and resume the life, so that killing Rick does not actually accomplish anything, because another Rick, identical, with all the same memories, simply stands up and continues. This gets treated, often, as a power, a piece of Rick's invulnerability, the reason he can be so reckless, the reason he walks into danger without fear. He cannot really be killed. Death is, for Rick, an inconvenience, a respawn, a reload. Sit with it long enough and it becomes the bleakest thing about him. A man who cannot die, who has arranged to always continue, who knows that any death is temporary, and any ending is a reset, is a man for whom death has lost its meaning. And a man for whom death has lost its meaning is a man for whom life has lost its meaning too, because the two are bound together. Death is part of what makes a life. It is the edge that gives the middle its shape. Roy's life mattered, to the extent it mattered, because it ended. Rick's life does not end, it just continues, body after body, memory transferred and resumed, and the continuation is not a gift. This is why the next layer cuts as deep as it does. We are near the bottom now. The next thing the show buried is the thing it guards most carefully, the question the whole iceberg has been pointing at since the parody short, and the buried bodies, and the catchphrase bird person translated, whether Rick Sanchez wants to be alive. This is a sensitive thing to look at, and it is worth saying plainly before we go further, that the show treats it as sensitive too, more sensitive than almost anything else. The show jokes about death constantly, casually, by the dozen. It destroys worlds, and buries bodies, and turns suffering into punchlines. There is one kind of death it does not joke about cleanly, and it is the question of whether its central character, given a real choice, would choose to stop existing. The show approaches this slowly, from a distance, in fragments, the way you approach something you are afraid of. The clearest the show ever gets is in a sequence near the end of one of its early seasons, a montage set to music, in which Rick, alone, builds a device in his garage. The family is asleep, the house is quiet, and Rick, the smartest being in the universe, the man who can do anything, assembles a machine, positions himself in front of it, and prepares to use it to end his own life. The device activates, and it fails, or is interrupted, and in the morning the family finds him slumped on the floor, and assumes he was drunk, and Rick says nothing, and the moment passes, and the show never refers to it directly again. But it happened. The show showed you, in a quiet montage with no dialogue, the most powerful character in its universe attempting to die, and then it let the family misread the evidence the way the family always misreads Rick, and it moved on, the way the show always moves on. Once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it underneath everything else Rick does. The catchphrase bird person translated, the death wish hidden in a punchline, was not a metaphor, it was a description. Rick has tried. The show lets you watch. What sits underneath this, the deepest thing in the iceberg, is the reason. The most capable being in existence, the one who can go anywhere and do anything and undo almost any problem, wants to stop, and the show's answer for why, assembled from fragments across 7 seasons, is the most coherent and most bleak thing it ever built. Rick wants to stop because he has run the experiment. He has tested whether anything matters across infinite universes. The result came back negative, and a man cannot unknow a result like that. He has seen too much. The portal gun showed him a billion versions of every face he ever loved. And the lesson of a billion versions is that no single version is precious. And a man who has truly learned that lesson has lost the thing that makes survival feel necessary. And yet he stays. That is the part that turns the bleakness into something almost like hope, though the show is too careful to call it hope. Rick tried to die, and failed, and then he did not try again, and the reason, the show suggests without ever stating it, is the family. Beth, Morty, the garage, and the people in the house who annoy him and need him and do not understand him. Rick has every reason to stop and one reason to stay, and the one reason has, so far, been enough. The family does not prove that anything matters in a cosmic sense. The cosmos is still infinite and still indifferent. Rick has chosen, against his own conclusions, against the result of his own experiment, to act as though Morty matters, even though he knows there are infinite Mortys, even though he buried one in the backyard, even though he could replace this one through a green door in an afternoon. That is the whole show, underneath everything. A man who has proven that nothing matters, choosing, every single day, to behave as though one thing does. He does not believe it. He has decided the believing is beside the point, that you can know the universe is meaningless and still get out of bed for a grandson. That meaning is something you do rather than something you discover, stubbornly, in the face of everything you know. Rick is the smartest being alive, and he cannot argue himself out of caring about Morty, and the failure of his own intelligence to talk him out of love is in the end, the most hopeful thing the show ever suggested. The genius cannot reason his way to not caring. The caring outlasts the genius, outlasts the multiverse, outlasts the experiment. It is the one thing the portal gun could not dissolve. The show guards this so carefully because stating it would ruin it. If Rick ever said, out loud, that he stays alive for Morty, the show would become sentimental, and sentimentality is the death of everything the show is. So it never says it. It shows you the attempt in a wordless montage, and then lets the family think he was drunk. It hides the death wish in a catchphrase. It lets Rick save Morty over and over while insisting he does not care, and it trusts you to see that the insistence is the lie, and the saving is the truth. The whole show is built to let you understand, without ever being told, that the cruelest, most nihilistic character on television keeps choosing to live for the sake of a boy he claims is interchangeable, and that this choice, made daily, without belief, is the closest thing to heroism the show is willing to allow. That is the bottom of the part of the iceberg that belongs to Rick. a death wish, a family, and a daily decision to stay anyway. Everything else, the science, the adventures, the infinite universes, sits on top of that. There is one layer at this depth we have not reached, and it is the loneliest thing in the show, and it explains the machine in the garage better than anything. The episode with Unity. Unity is a being, or a collection of beings, a hive mind, a single consciousness that controls a vast number of individual bodies across a planet, all of them part of one mind, one will. Unity is, the show reveals, a former lover of Rick's, someone from his past, with whom he has a history of genuine intimacy. The episode follows Rick reuniting with Unity, and for a while it is the closest thing to happy the show ever lets Rick be, because Unity is the one entity that can match him, that can keep up with him, that is as vast and as capable and as restless as he is. The relationship is doomed, and the way it is doomed is the thing that sits deepest. Rick and Unity are bad for each other. Together they encourage each other's worst impulses. They spiral into excess. They bring out the parts of each other that should be restrained. And Unity, a consciousness that controls an entire civilization, recognizes that being with Rick means losing control of itself, means letting Rick pull it into chaos, means becoming worse. So Unity leaves. It leaves Rick a note, and the note is kind, and devastating, and clear-eyed in a way Rick cannot be about himself. Unity says, in effect, that it has to leave because Rick is the kind of person who makes everyone around him worse, who cannot be loved without being destroyed by it, or destroying the thing that loves him, and that the healthiest thing Unity can do is walk away from the one being it might actually love. Rick, alone, after Unity leaves, goes back to his garage and builds the machine and tries to die. The attempt we talked about, the wordless montage, comes directly after Unity leaves him. The show connects them on purpose. Rick found, for a moment, the one thing that might have been connection on his level, intimacy with an equal, and it left him, correctly, because being with him is poison, and the loss of it, the confirmation that even the one being that could match him cannot stay, is what sends him to the machine. The deepest sadness in the show is right here. Rick is not just lonely, he is lonely in a specific, unfixable way, because the thing that makes him unable to connect, the intelligence and intensity that drive everyone away, is the same intelligence and intensity that make him who he is. He cannot be loved without harm, and he knows it, and the one being clear-sighted enough to love him was also clear-sighted enough to leave. That is as deep as we are going. Everything below this is the same thing in different costumes. A man too smart and too damaged to connect, surrounded by infinite proof that nothing matters, choosing, against all of it, on his worst days failing to choose, to stay alive for a family that hurts him because the hurt is the proof they are real. The whole iceberg is that, all the way down. The science is decoration. The adventures are a way of not being home. The infinite universes are a prison. And at the center of it is a lonely man in a garage who tried to die the night his one real chance at love walked out, and who got up the next morning and made breakfast for his grandson anyway. We are coming back up now. There is light again, faintly, from the surface. There are a few layers near the top we should look at on the way, things that take on a different color once you have seen what is underneath them. The first is something the show does well and explains never, the relationship between Rick and Morty and the older cartoon that haunts it. Rick and Morty exists in a tradition, the long-running animated family comedy, and the giant in that tradition, the show that defined it, the one that has floated in a permanent present for over 30 years, is the thing Rick and Morty is both descended from and reacting against. The Simpsons. The Simpsons keeps its family frozen. Bart never ages. The town never changes. The show built a structure designed to run forever, a permanent present where nothing accumulates and nothing concludes, and it has run forever, or close enough, outlasting its own golden age by decades. The choice it made, to float, to never end, to keep the family young and the world unchanged, was a choice about what a show is for. The Simpsons decided it was a place you could always return to, a fixed point, a thing that would be there unchanged whenever you needed it. Rick and Morty looked at that choice and made a different one, or tried to. It built a show where things do change, where the buried Morty stays buried, where Beth's clone problem does not resolve, where Bird Person dies and comes back wrong, where consequences sometimes accumulate. It built serialization into a tradition that had survived by refusing to serialize. The tension in Rick and Morty, the lore that gets planted and abandoned, the continuity that gets built and mocked, comes partly from this. From a show trying to have it both ways, trying to be the episodic comfort of The Simpsons and the consequential drama of something serialized, and not fully committing to either, because committing to the floating present would mean giving up the depth, and committing to the serialization would mean giving up the comfort. The show wants both, and can fully have neither. The deepest version of the comparison is this. The Simpsons floats because its audience needs it to float, because the comfort of a thing that never changes is the thing the audience comes for. Rick and Morty resists floating because the part of its audience the show cares about wants the opposite, wants consequence, wants a story that goes somewhere, wants the buried Morty to matter. The show is caught between giving them what they want, which is meaning, and protecting itself with irony, which is the refusal of meaning. It cannot decide whether it is a place to return to or a story to follow, and the indecision is the show, the unresolved tension that some viewers experience as depth and others experience as cowardice. There is a layer here about the show's relationship with its own fans, and it is one of the strangest a show has ever had. Rick and Morty is on its surface very smart, or at least very interested in seeming smart. It references real science, real philosophy, real ideas about physics and consciousness. A portion of its audience took this as an invitation to treat the show as a credential, as evidence of their own intelligence, as a thing you had to be smart to appreciate. This grew, around the height of the show's popularity, into a genuine cultural phenomenon, a wave of fans declaring you had to have a high intellect to truly understand the show, that the humor went over the heads of ordinary viewers, that appreciating Rick and Morty was itself a sign of a superior mind. It became a joke eventually, mocked widely, the idea that a cartoon about a burping scientist was a test of intelligence. The joke obscured something real. The show had, in a sense, taught its audience to be like Rick, to value intelligence above feeling, to treat understanding as superiority, to look down on the people who did not get it. The fans who insisted you had to be smart to appreciate the show had absorbed the show's worst trait, Rick's contempt for ordinary minds, and turned it into an identity. They had become little Ricks, dismissing the Jerrys around them, certain of their own superiority, missing entirely that the show, watched closely, was not celebrating Rick's contempt. It was diagnosing it. The show thinks Rick's intelligence has ruined him. A portion of the audience took the ruined man as a role model. This is the same failure as the sauce. The show makes a point about something. A portion of the audience takes the surface and discards the substance, and in doing so demonstrates the point more thoroughly than the show could on its own. The show says intelligence without wisdom becomes cruelty, and a portion of the audience responded by being cruel about their intelligence. The show says Rick's contempt for ordinary people is a symptom of his damage, and the audience adopted the contempt as a badge. Rick and Morty has a recurring problem. Its satire is too subtle for the surface, and the surface is too appealing to look past, and so the thing it warns against keeps becoming the thing its fans embrace. The creators have wrestled with this openly, and it has clearly bothered them, because they did not set out to make a show that flatters cruel people into feeling smart. They set out to make a show about a damaged man, and a portion of the audience saw the damage as aspirational. There is no clean solution to it. A show cannot control who watches or what they take. But it is a strange weight to carry, to have built something as a warning and watched part of your audience treat it as an instruction manual, to have made Rick as a cautionary figure and watched people get his face tattooed on their bodies as a hero. Underneath the audience is the show's own longevity, and Rick and Morty handles longevity differently from the older cartoons it gets compared to. It was not built to float, it was built with an end in mind. The creators talked, early on, about a finite number of episodes, about a story that would eventually conclude, about not wanting to become the thing that runs forever and outlives its own reasons. Then the show became enormously popular, and the network ordered a very large number of episodes, a multi-season commitment that guaranteed years of continued production, and the wish to end on its own terms collided with the reality of the show being too valuable to allow to end. The same collision every successful show eventually faces. The creators wanted a finite story. The business wanted an infinite product. The show now exists in the tension between those things, produced under a commitment that runs years into the future, by creators who once spoke about wanting it to end, on a network with every financial reason to never let it. This matters because it touches the thing the show is about. A show about the emptiness of infinite repetition, produced under a contract that guarantees its own near-infinite repetition. is in a strange position. The thing it diagnoses, the way infinity drains meaning, the way endless repetition makes any single instance disposable, is the thing it is now subject to. There will be more episodes because there is a contract, not necessarily because there is more story, and the audience can feel the difference, the way you can feel when a thing continues past its reasons. The show that warned about the emptiness of infinite continuation is being continued, possibly past the point of its own meaning, by the same logic of infinite production it spent 7 seasons critiquing. The iceberg has a joke at the bottom, and the joke is that the show became the thing it was about. We are most of the way back up now. There are smaller things near the top, widely known, worth one more look, because they look different after the descent. The interdimensional cable episodes. These are the ones where Rick and the family watch television from across the multiverse, a stream of channels showing programming from infinite alternate Earths, and the content was largely improvised, Roiland riffing for hours, the writers assembling the funniest fragments. They are, on their surface, the show at its most purely silly, a collection of absurd fake commercials and bizarre alternate universe programs with no plot and no point. Underneath them sits the same thing that sits under everything. The interdimensional cable shows you infinity, and infinity is exhausting. Channel after channel of slightly different realities, each with its own absurd content, none of it mattering, all of it equally available. And the family watching it the way people watch anything, half engaged, looking for something to land on, scrolling through infinite content, and feeling nothing in particular. It is the multiverse as television, the infinite as a thing you flip through on a couch. And it is, quietly, a portrait of what infinity actually feels like when you have it. There is no wonder in it, and no awe, just more channels, more content, more options, and the slow numbing that comes from having access to everything, and caring about none of it. There is a fan reading that goes deeper and connects these episodes to the way we live now, scrolling through endless content, infinite options, everything available and nothing satisfying, the condition of having access to more than any human ever had, and feeling somehow emptier for it. The show made these episodes years before the feeling became universal, and watching them now, the family on the couch flipping through infinite realities and landing on nothing, looks less like science fiction and more like a documentary about the present. The infinite content did not make the family happy, it made them numb, and we are all now, the family on the couch. Near the top, almost at the surface, is the thing the show is most famous for, the thing on the t-shirts and the posters, the thing that became a phenomenon detached from the show entirely. Pickle Rick. In an episode in the 3rd season, Rick turns himself into a pickle. He does it to avoid attending a family therapy session, transforming himself into a pickle so he physically cannot go, an elaborate scheme to escape an appointment that would require him to be emotionally present. The episode follows Pickle Rick through an increasingly violent adventure, as he builds himself a body out of cockroach and rat parts and fights his way through a building, while, in counterpoint, the family attends the therapy session he was avoiding. The episode became a cultural event, the image of Rick as a pickle spreading far beyond the show's audience, becoming a meme, a shorthand, a thing people referenced without having watched the show. For a while it was the most recognizable thing about Rick and Morty, the pickle, cut loose from its context. The context is what matters, and the context is the therapy session. The whole point of the episode, the thing underneath the pickle, is that Rick turned himself into a pickle to avoid therapy, and the therapist, in the session he was avoiding, diagnoses exactly why. She explains, in a speech that is one of the most direct things any character ever says about Rick, that he uses his intelligence to avoid the difficult, boring, repetitive work of actually living, of maintaining relationships, of being present, of doing the unglamorous maintenance a real life requires. Rick would rather turn himself into a pickle and fight rats in a sewer than sit in a room and talk about his feelings, because the pickle, however absurd, is easier than the feelings. The genius is a form of avoidance. The adventures are a way of not being home. The whole spectacular apparatus of Rick's intelligence is, the therapist suggests, an elaborate machine for never having to sit still long enough to feel anything. That is the pickle. The most famous, most memeable, most surface-level thing about the show is underneath a diagnosis of its central character as a man who would rather do literally anything, including becoming a pickle, than do the quiet, hard work of being a person. The audience took the pickle. The show was offering the diagnosis, The gap between the pickle on the t-shirt and the therapist's speech in the episode is the whole gap between what the show is famous for and what the show is actually about. There is a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole. The name is a joke, aggressively a joke, the kind of name designed to signal that the show does not take itself seriously. He is a small, cheerful, yellowish creature who appears in the family's life as though he has always been there. The way he is introduced is one of the quietly cleverest things the show ever attempted, a trick played on the audience about the nature of memory. In the episode that introduces him, Mr. Poopy Butthole behaves as though he is a long-established part of the family, a beloved friend who has been around for years, and the episode is built to make you, the viewer, feel as though you have somehow forgotten him, as though he was always there and you simply did not notice. The episode plays with the idea of a parasite, an alien that implants false memories, that makes everyone believe it has always been part of the family. And the horror of it is that you cannot tell, watching, which characters are real and which are parasites with implanted histories, because the implanted memories feel exactly as real as the genuine ones. The resolution turns on a distinction the show makes carefully. The parasites can only implant pleasant memories. They cannot create memories of conflict, of pain, of the bad times. So the way to tell a real person from a parasite is to ask whether you have any negative memories of them. If every memory is good, the person is a parasite, because real relationships accumulate hurt. Real history includes the bad along with the good, and a being you only have pleasant memories of cannot be real, because reality is not only pleasant. The family survives by remembering the times each person hurt them, by using their accumulated pain as proof of authenticity. The bad memories are the evidence that the relationship is real. Mr. Poopy Butthole survives the test. He turns out to be real, because someone has a genuinely painful memory of him, and the painful memory proves he is not a parasite. He stays. He becomes a recurring presence, popping up across the seasons, and his survival of the parasite test means something, because it means the family's relationship with him includes real hurt, real history, the accumulated damage that makes a thing genuine. The thing underneath this, the reason it sits so deep, is what it says about love and pain. The show makes an argument, inside a joke about a parasite, that the proof of a real relationship is that it has hurt you, that a connection you only have good memories of is not a real connection at all. That love, the genuine kind, is inseparable from the accumulated injuries of actually knowing someone over time, and that a relationship without any pain in it is a fantasy, a parasite, a false memory wearing the face of a friend. The way you know your family is real is that they have hurt you, and you remember it, and you love them anyway. That is the test. That is the show's whole theory of connection, hidden inside a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole. It connects back to Rick, the way everything does. Rick's relationships are full of pain. He has hurt everyone he loves, repeatedly, badly. By the logic of the parasite episode, that pain is the proof that the relationships are real. Rick could surround himself with beings who only generate pleasant memories. He could portal to a universe where everyone adores him without complication. He stays in the garage with a family that resents him, that he has wounded, that wounds him back, because that wounding is the evidence that they are real, that the connection is genuine and not a comfortable fantasy. The pain is the realness. Rick, who can have anything, chooses the relationships that hurt, because the alternative is the parasite's lie, a love with no history, which is no love at all. There is a phrase the show built an entire piece of merchandise empire around, and it deserves a closer look than the t-shirts give it. The thing Rick shouts, the rallying cry, the words that became the show's signature, the promise of more adventures forever. On the surface it is pure enthusiasm, a grandfather and grandson and the open road of infinite universes, 100 years of it, 1,000. Underneath, once bird person has translated the despair hidden in Rick's other catchphrases. The promise of forever reads differently. Forever for Rick is not a gift he is offering Morty. It is a sentence, 100 years of being dragged through trauma, of watching worlds die, of burying versions of yourself, of never being allowed to grow up or get out or have a life that is your own. Rick promises Morty forever the way a man promises a thing he is not sure either of them will survive. What the show does to Morty across its run is the quiet horror underneath the adventures. Morty starts as an anxious but recognizably ordinary boy. By the later seasons he has seen things no child should see, killed when he had to, buried his own body, lost worlds, watched people he loved die, and absorbed, slowly, some of Rick's own armor. The damage accumulates, The boy gets harder, colder, more capable, and more wounded, and the show lets you watch a child being eroded into something closer to the man who is eroding him. The promise of forever is the promise of more of this. Morty does not always want it. There are episodes where Morty is desperate to be free of Rick, to have a normal life, to stop being the camouflage and the sidekick and the witness to horrors, and he never quite gets out, because the show cannot let him out, because a Morty without a Rick is not a show. The boy is bound to the man by the same logic that binds everything in the multiverse. He is too useful, too necessary, too load-bearing to be released. There is a version of Morty the show shows you only in glimpses. The Morty who got away, or the Morty who broke, or the Morty who became something terrible. Evil Morty is one of those. The show keeps suggesting that the role of Morty is a kind of slow injury, that being the grandson of a man like Rick is a thing you survive rather than a thing you enjoy, and that the various damaged and dangerous Mortys scattered across the multiverse are all just versions of the same boy who took the injury differently. Our Morty is the one who so far has held together. The show never promises he will keep holding. The forever Rick keeps shouting about is the thing most likely to break him, and Rick, who knows everything, knows this too, and shouts it anyway, because the alternative to forever with Morty is being alone, and being alone is the thing that sends Rick to the machine in the garage. There is a character we have not given enough attention, who lives mostly near the top of the iceberg but carries one of the show's only genuinely hopeful arcs, Summer. Summer Smith is Morty's older sister, and for a long stretch she is underused, a teenager in the background, defined mostly by ordinary teenage concerns, social anxiety and self-image, and the wish to be seen as more than she is. She is not the genius, she is not the chosen sidekick, she is the other grandchild, the one Rick does not take on adventures, the one left at home. Summer's arc, traced across the seasons, is one of the few in the show that bends towards something like growth. She starts as a typical teenager, and slowly becomes more capable, more confident, genuinely tougher. Rick begins occasionally to take her seriously, to bring her along, to treat her as someone worth his time, and the moments where Rick chooses Summer, where he recognizes something in her worth engaging, are small but real. Summer is the family member who most wants Rick's approval, and who most slowly, over years, begins to earn it. Not by becoming a genius, which she never does, but by becoming brave, by refusing to be dismissed, by insisting on her own place in a family that initially had no role for her. What makes Summer quietly important is that she represents a path Morty does not get to take. Morty was chosen, dragged into Rick's world young, damaged by it before he could choose. Summer chose. She fought her way into Rick's world, rather than being pulled into it, and the difference matters, because choosing it gives her a standing that Morty, the conscript, never had. Summer is the family member who looked at the danger and the chaos, and the cosmic horror, and decided she wanted in anyway, on her own terms. And that decision gives her an agency the conscripted Morty never fully has. She is the volunteer in a show full of conscripts and prisoners, and her volunteering is, in its small way, one of the only free choices anyone in the show gets to make. The relationship between Summer and Rick deepens in the later seasons, into something almost tender, by the show's standards, which means it involves Rick insulting her slightly less, and trusting her slightly more. There is no grand declaration. The show would never allow that. But there is a slow accumulation of evidence that Rick has come to value Summer, to see in her something he respects, and given how little Rick respects anyone, the respect lands heavily. Summer earned a place in the heart of a man who believes hearts are a liability, and she earned it by being stubborn, by being brave, by refusing the small role the family first handed her. There are two more things worth sitting with before we finish, less about any single character, and more about the spirit of the whole thing. The first is the problem of knowing too much. Rick is, within the show's universe, close to all-knowing. He knows how everything works. He can predict outcomes, calculate odds, see the consequences of actions before anyone takes them. The show treats this, occasionally, as a curse rather than a gift, because a being who knows how everything will turn out cannot be surprised, cannot hope, cannot feel the uncertainty that makes life feel like it is happening, rather than being read off a page he wrote in advance. There is a particular loneliness in knowing too much, and the show finds it in Rick over and over. He cannot enjoy a story because he sees the ending. He cannot be moved by a danger because he already knows whether everyone survives. He cannot fall in love without calculating the way it ends. The intelligence that makes him powerful makes him unable to be present, because being present requires not knowing what comes next. And Rick always knows what comes next. He has read ahead in every book. He has spoiled every surprise. A life with no surprises left in it is a life that has, in a sense, already been lived, which is part of why Rick moves through his own existence with the weariness of a man rewatching something he has seen too many times. The few moments where Rick is genuinely surprised, where something happens he did not predict, are the moments he comes most alive. Morty does this to him occasionally, does something Rick did not see coming, and the surprise on Rick's face in those moments is the closest he comes to joy, because surprise is the proof that not everything is known, that the universe still has something he has not already calculated, that there is, somewhere, a door he has not opened. Morty's value to Rick, underneath everything, may be exactly this. Morty is unpredictable in a way the universe is not. Morty surprises him. A being who has spoiled every other surprise will hold tight to the one person who can still catch him off guard, even if he can never admit that this is why. The second thing, the last deep one, is the show's relationship to sincerity, which is the most defining and most frustrating thing about it. Rick and Morty is terrified of meaning. It builds toward emotional moments and then undercuts them with jokes. It plants meaningful threads and then mocks the audience for caring. It approaches sincerity constantly and then flinches away at the last second, deflecting with irony, because to mean something sincerely is to be vulnerable, and the show, like its main character, would rather do anything than be vulnerable. There is a line, delivered in a moment of conflict, where a crowd is booing one of the characters, and the response is that their boos mean nothing because the character has seen what makes them cheer. It became a popular quote, a thing fans repeat, a piece of armor against criticism. Underneath it is the show's whole defensive posture, the refusal to let anyone's opinion land, the insistence that caring what people think is a weakness. This is the thing the show shares most deeply with Rick, the terror of being moved, the conviction that to be affected by something is to be diminished by it, the belief that the safest way to live is to care about nothing, so that nothing can hurt you. There is a way the show talks about the tragedy of the show. The thing that makes it more than a clever cartoon is that it does not actually believe its own armor. Underneath the irony, underneath the deflection, underneath the refusal to mean anything, the show clearly does mean something, clearly does care, clearly is moved by its own characters and their pain. The sincerity is there, it is just buried, hidden under layers of jokes, because the show is afraid of it, the way Rick is afraid of it, the way a certain kind of very smart, very damaged person is always afraid of admitting they care, because caring is the thing that can be taken from you, and they have already had too much taken. The whole show is a person who feels everything pretending to feel nothing. That is the iceberg. The surface is the pretending. The depths are the feeling. The distance between them, from the burping nihilist on top to the grieving man at the bottom, is the show. All of it. Every episode, the long, sustained performance of a thing that cares desperately, trying to convince you, and itself, that it does not care at all. That is the bottom of the iceberg, not all of it. You could spend 100 more evenings down here and not exhaust what the show buried, because 7 seasons of obsessive, structured, improvised storytelling accumulates more than any single night could hold, and there are threads we did not pull and episodes we did not open. These layers, the ones we looked at tonight, are the shape of the thing, the parody that grew into a family, the portal gun that proved nothing matters, the infinite Earths and the buried Mortys, and the question of whether any of them are real. Jerry, who is not enough, in a show about a man who is too much. Bird person, who could read the death wish hidden in a catchphrase. The wife and daughter at the center of Rick, the loss that built the portal gun. The search for one specific face across infinite universes that found only strangers wearing it. The clone of Beth that nobody can identify. The Meeseeks who begged to die. The sauce the audience chased, proving the joke true. The recasting that lived out the show's own thesis in public. Evil Morty, who understood the prison and escaped it. The attempt in the quiet garage, after Unity left, that the family mistook for drinking. The Citadel, where infinite genius rebuilt infinite misery. Roy, a whole life lived in an arcade in an afternoon. The Pickle, which was a diagnosis. The Parasite test, where pain proves love is real. Summer, who chose. And underneath all of it, the lonely man who knows too much, feeling everything, performing nothing, getting up every morning for a grandson he insists is interchangeable. choosing to stay alive without believing there is any reason to, which may be the only kind of courage the show believes in. Bodies that sits underneath everything else, and once you notice it you cannot stop seeing it. Bodies in Rick and Morty are disposable. They get swapped, cloned, melted, mutated, abandoned, worn like clothes, and discarded when they stop being useful. Rick changes bodies the way other people change shirts. He keeps spares. He has died and woken up in a new one. He has put his mind into a younger version of himself, into a teenage version, into machines, into other people. The show treats the human body as a container, a thing the self rides around in, replaceable the moment it breaks, and a worldview that treats bodies as containers is a worldview that has stopped believing the body is the person, which is a quiet kind of horror the show never names but keeps demonstrating. Think of how often a character in this show dies, and it does not matter. A Rick dies, another Rick stands up, a Morty is buried, another Morty eats breakfast, a body is destroyed, a clone is grown. The show has trained you episode by episode to stop flinching at death, because death in this universe is so rarely permanent and so rarely meaningful. And the training works. By the later seasons you watch a version of a main character die, and you feel almost nothing, because you have learned that it does not stick, that there is always another one, that the body on the floor was just a container and the self has already moved on. The show did that to you on purpose. It made death cheap so that you would feel the way Rick feels, numb to a thing that should be the most serious thing there is, and the numbness it gave you is the numbness it is trying to show you is wrong. Because the show does occasionally make a death matter, and when it does, the contrast is the whole point. Bird Person's death matters, the original Diane's death matters, the young Beth's death matters. These are the deaths the show refuses to make cheap, the ones it will not undo with a clone or a portal, and they are the deaths that built Rick into what he is. The show separates the world into two kinds of death, the disposable kind it shows you constantly to numb you, and the permanent kind it hides at the bottom of the iceberg because the permanent kind is the only kind that hurts. Rick lives surrounded by disposable death, and haunted by the permanent kind, and the gap between them is exactly the gap between the man he performs and the man he is. He acts like all death is the cheap kind. He is destroyed by the one death that was not. There is a thread the show plants early and lets run quietly underneath the family, and it concerns Beth, the adult Beth, the surgeon, and the thing she carries that nobody quite says out loud. Beth is a horse surgeon. The show makes a recurring joke of this, the seriousness with which she takes a profession that the show frames as slightly less than human medicine, the wounded pride of a brilliant woman who became a doctor for animals rather than people. Underneath the joke is something the show is genuinely interested in, which is that Beth is her father's daughter. She has Rick's intelligence, Rick's capacity for cruelty, Rick's coldness, and Rick's bottomless need to be told she is special. She is what Rick made when he raised a child, and she spent her life trying to earn the approval of a man who left her, and the leaving shaped her the way the loss of Diane shaped Rick. The show suggests in its darker moments that Beth has a streak of genuine cruelty in her, the same streak that runs through Rick, and that it surfaced in her childhood in ways the family does not discuss. There is a friend from Beth's childhood, a person who disappeared, and the show lets you wonder whether young Beth had something to do with it, whether the cruelty was there from the start, whether Rick recognized it in his daughter, and that recognition is part of why he treats her the way he does. He sees himself in her. He sees the coldness, the capacity for damage, the same wound he carries, and he both loves her for being like him, and fears what being like him will do to her. Beth is the evidence that Rick's damage is heritable, that the thing in him passed into her, that the loneliness and the cruelty and the genius are not just his but a family inheritance moving down the generations toward Morty, who is being shaped by Rick right now, the way Beth was shaped by Rick before him. That is the quiet tragedy underneath the family. Rick damaged Beth by leaving. Beth, damaged, married Jerry, the safest, least threatening man she could find, a man who would never leave her the way her father did, and resented him for being exactly the safe, ordinary thing she chose him for. Their children grew up inside that resentment, inside a marriage built on one partner's fear of abandonment and the other partner's fear of not being enough. And then Rick came back, decades later, and moved into the garage, and began doing to Morty what he had once done to Beth, pulling a child into his orbit, shaping that child, damaging that child, passing the inheritance down another generation. The show is Underneath the Adventures, a portrait of how damage moves through a family, How a single loss at the top, Diane, the bomb, the empty house, ripples down through Rick to Beth to Morty, each generation carrying a piece of the original wound without fully understanding where it came from. Morty carries his own version of the family wound, and the show is braver about this than it is about almost anything, because it lets a child be genuinely broken by what happens to him. The Morty of the later seasons is not the Morty of the pilot. He has been hardened, he has killed, he has seen things that would break an adult, and he was not an adult when he saw them. There are moments in the later seasons where Morty's own death wish surfaces, where the boy who was dragged into the multiverse and shown how meaningless everything is, starts to sound like the grandfather who showed him, where Morty's optimism, the thing that made him the heart of the show in the early seasons, has worn thin enough that you can see the despair underneath it. There is an episode where Morty, pushed past his limit, has a kind of breakdown, where the accumulated weight of everything Rick has put him through comes out, and the show lets you see that Morty is not okay, that he was never going to be okay, that a child cannot be exposed to what Morty has been exposed to, and come out the other side whole. The boy has absorbed Rick's nihilism the way a sponge absorbs water, slowly, completely, until it is part of him. He has learned that nothing matters. He has learned that he is one of infinite copies. He has learned that the universe does not care, and that his own grandfather buried a version of him in the backyard. A child who learns those things does not stay a child for long, and the show, in its quietest and most honest moments, mourns the boy Morty was before Rick got to him. This is the thing the forever promise actually means. The 100 years of adventures Rick keeps shouting about. It means 100 years of Morty being slowly turned into Rick. It means the inheritance completing itself, the wound passing all the way down, the optimistic boy becoming the nihilistic old man, the cycle closing. The show has shown you what an old broken Morty looks like, in glimpses, in alternate versions, in the evil Morty who refused the whole arrangement. The path Rick is putting Morty on leads, if nothing interrupts it, to a Morty who has become what Rick is, and Rick knows this, and keeps shouting about forever anyway, because the alternative is letting Morty go, and Rick cannot let Morty go, because Morty is the one thing keeping him from the machine in the garage. Rick is sacrificing the boy's wholeness to save his own life. The show never says it that plainly. The show does not have to. There is a smaller thread that says the same thing in a gentler key, and it belongs to the family dog. In one of the earliest episodes, Rick gives the family dog a device that makes it intelligent, and the intelligence grows, and the dog, now able to think, looks at its situation and understands for the first time what it actually is: a creature owned by people, a thing kept on a leash, told when to eat, denied any say in its own life, loved in the way you love a possession rather than a person. The newly intelligent dog leads an uprising, takes over, and then, having won, having the power to do to humans what humans did to dogs, chooses mercy, chooses to leave, chooses to take the other dogs and build a world of their own elsewhere rather than become the thing that oppressed them. The dog is named Snowball, a name it rejects once it becomes intelligent, because the name was given by an owner and means nothing to the creature itself. And the episode, which plays mostly as a comedy, a parody of a famous science fiction movie, is underneath one of the only genuinely hopeful things the show ever did, because Snowball, given intelligence and power, given every reason to be cruel, chose not to be. Snowball is the anti-Rick. Snowball got the thing Rick has: awareness, intelligence, the power to do anything, and Snowball used it to walk away from cruelty rather than toward it. The dog did the thing Rick could not do. It looked at the meaninglessness and the power and the freedom, and it chose kindness, chose to build something rather than burn something, chose to leave the prison rather than become its warden. The show lets Snowball go and never fully follows up. The way it lets evil Morty go, the way it lets every character who escapes the cycle disappear over the horizon while the camera stays behind with the people who are still trapped. There is a pattern in that, in who the show follows and who it lets leave. It follows Rick, who stays in the prison. It follows Morty, who cannot get out. It follows the family, locked in the house, locked in the marriage, locked in the inheritance. And it lets the ones who figure out how to leave, Snowball, Unity, evil Morty, walk away into a freedom the show will not depict. Because the show is not about freedom, it is about the people who do not get it. The escapes happen at the edges of the frame. The center of the frame is always the garage, always the man who could leave through any of his own doors and chooses, every day, to stay in the cage with the people he loves and damages. There is one more thing at this depth, and it is the strangest and the saddest, and it concerns the question of whether the show is at bottom a comedy at all. Because everything we have looked at tonight, the grief and the death wish and the disposable bodies and the inherited damage and the broken boy, none of it sounds like comedy. It sounds like one of the bleakest stories ever told. And yet the show is funny. It is genuinely, reliably funny, episode after episode, and the funniness is not separate from the bleakness. The funniness is built on top of the bleakness, the way a house is built on top of the ground, and the question the show never answers is whether the comedy is a way of surviving the despair or a way of avoiding it. Rick is funny. That is the thing that makes him bearable, the thing that makes you keep watching a character who is, on paper, a monster. His humor is quick and cruel and brilliant, and it is also, the show suggests, the same armor as everything else, the same deflection, the same refusal to sit still in a feeling. Rick makes jokes for the same reason he turns into a pickle, for the same reason he goes on adventures, for the same reason he drinks. The jokes are a way of not being present, a way of staying one step ahead of the feeling that would catch him if he ever stopped moving. The funniest character in the show is funny because being funny is how he avoids being sad, and the show is funny for the same reason, because the alternative to the jokes is the grief at the bottom of the iceberg, and the grief is unbearable, and the jokes are how everyone, the characters and the writers and the audience, keeps from drowning in it. That is the deepest thing about the comedy. It is not that the show is funny despite being sad. It is that the funny and the sad are the same thing wearing two faces, that every joke is a small refusal to feel the thing underneath it, that the laughter is the sound a person makes when the alternative is to break. The show taught a generation to laugh at nihilism, to find the meaninglessness funny, to treat the void as a punchline, and the void is a punchline, in the show's hands, right up until the moment it is not, right up until the wordless montage in the garage, or the note Unity leaves, or the corpse in the backyard, when the laughter stops and the thing underneath it shows through, and you remember that the whole time you were laughing at a man trying not to die. There is a fear Rick has that the show treats almost as a throwaway, and that turns out, the longer you sit with it, to be the only fear he has left. Rick is not afraid of death. He has defeated death, arranged around it, made it temporary. He is not afraid of pain, or danger, or loss, having survived more of all three than any being should. The one thing Rick is afraid of, the show suggests in a dozen small ways, is boredom. The flat, gray, ordinary stretch of a life with nothing happening in it. The quiet afternoon with no adventure, and no crisis, and no problem to solve. The afternoon where there is nothing to do but sit in the feeling he has spent his whole life outrunning. Boredom, for Rick, is not a minor discomfort. It is the thing that lets the despair catch up. As long as something is happening, as long as there is a portal to open, or a monster to fight, or a device to build, Rick is moving too fast for the grief to reach him. The moment everything goes still, the moment there is nothing left to do, the grief is right there, where it always was, and Rick cannot bear to be in the same room with it, so he keeps moving. The endless adventures are not curiosity, they are flight. A man running from a thing inside himself, using the entire infinite multiverse as a place to run, and never once stopping long enough to let it catch him, because he knows what happens when it does, and what happens when it does is the machine in the garage. This reframes the whole show, gently, once you see it. Every adventure is an avoidance. Every trip through a green door is one more way of not being home, not being still, not being alone with the thing at the bottom. The portal gun, the device that defines the show, is in this reading less a tool of exploration than a tool of escape, a way to always have somewhere else to be, a guarantee that there will always be another universe to flee into before the silence of this one becomes unbearable. Rick built a machine that ensures he never has to sit still, and he calls it science, and the family calls it adventure, and underneath both names it is a man who cannot stop running because stopping is the one thing that would kill him. Morty is part of the running too. A boy is a reason to keep moving, a responsibility, a thing that needs protecting, and protecting Morty gives Rick somewhere to point all the motion. As long as Morty is in danger, Rick has a purpose that is not grief. The grandson is the excuse the flight needs, the justification for never stopping, and this is another thing the show will not say plainly, that Rick keeps Morty close partly because Morty is the reason Rick gets to keep running from himself. The boy is the engine and the alibi. The adventures are for Morty, Rick tells himself, and the telling is true enough to be believed and false enough to be the deepest lie Rick tells, because the adventures are also, always, for Rick, for the part of Rick that knows what waits in the stillness and will do anything, drag a child across infinite universes, to never have to face it. That is the last thing at the bottom. A man running from grief through an infinite multiverse, using a boy as the reason to run, calling the flight an adventure, and never stopping because the alternative to running is the garage, and the machine, and the silence he built his whole genius to escape. Maybe that is what the show is, underneath the science and the jokes and the infinite green doors. A long argument with itself about whether a person who has seen how meaningless everything is can find a reason to keep going anyway. Rick has seen it. He has run the experiment more thoroughly than anyone. He knows, with the certainty of a man who has checked, that the universe does not care, that he is one of infinite copies, that nothing he does will matter in a billion years or even next week. He stays anyway. He did not find a reason. He decided the staying does not require a reason. You can know the whole thing is pointless and still choose the grandson, still choose the garage, still choose the family that hurts you, still choose, against everything you know, to be here for one more morning. Maybe that is why a show this cynical, this committed to the idea that nothing matters, has connected with so many people so deeply. The show shows you the smartest being alive concluding that nothing matters, and then watching him fail, every single day, to act on that conclusion. The claim that nothing matters is on the surface. The failure to live by it is underneath. The genius cannot talk himself out of love. The nihilist keeps saving the boy. The man who tried to die keeps making breakfast. The failure of all that intelligence to produce the indifference it keeps preaching is the most hopeful thing the show has. Hidden at the very bottom, under everything, where the casual viewer never looks. The lesson, if it has one, is buried so deep and guarded so carefully that the show would deny it exists. Meaning is not something you find. It is something you do stubbornly, without proof, in a universe that offers you none. For the people who hurt you, because they are real, because the hurt is the proof, because the alternative is the machine in the garage, you do not have to look at any of this to enjoy the show. The enjoyment came first, the way it always does. The laughing at the burps and the portal jumps and the absurd inventions. The looking is just what happens when you enjoy something long enough that you start to wonder what is holding it up. What is holding up Rick and Morty, underneath the green light and the infinite doors, is a very old and very human question, asked by a cartoon that pretends not to care, about whether it is possible to keep living once you have understood that you do not have to. The show has not answered it. The show keeps not answering it, season after season, because the not answering is the show. But every time Rick chooses the boy over the void, every time the nihilist saves someone he claims not to love, the show makes its quiet case, the one it would never state out loud. The choosing is the answer. You do it anyway. You stay. One last small thing, and then I will let you sleep. If this was the kind of evening you would like to have again, the slow look at something familiar with nowhere you needed to be, then subscribe before you drift off, and the next one will be waiting for you. It costs nothing and it means everything to a channel like this one. The infinite universes are still out there, all of them, behind every green door, full of other Ricks and other Mortys living other versions of this same long argument. In this one, the one we have been watching, the man in the garage is still there, still drinking, still building things he should not build, still pretending the grandson asleep down the hall is just one of infinite copies and not the only reason he has not used the machine again. You can go back to the surface now. The show will be there, the way it always is, ready to make you laugh before it makes you think, hiding everything we looked at tonight underneath the jokes, where it has always been, waiting for the next person with a free evening and a slow night and know where they need to be. Thank you for spending some time down here with me. The doors are still open. They always are. Go gently, and if you drifted off somewhere in the middle, down near the bottom where the light gets thin, that is all right. That was rather the point. Sleep well.